The sun had only just started rising when Sergeant Lena Ward stepped out of the armored vehicle. The world around her was quiet, too quiet for a place that had seen so many battles. She took a slow breath, feeling the dry, dusty air of the small village in front of her. She had walked into danger many times before, but something about this day felt different, even if she couldn't explain why. Lena wasn't just any soldier. She was a combat medic, someone trained to run toward the injured, not away from danger. Her job was not to kill, but to save. She carried bandages, medicine, and tools to stop bleeding. Her friends joked that she carried more hope in her backpack than bullets in her pockets. The mission seemed simple on paper. Their unit had been sent to check the village, talk to the locals, and make sure no enemy fighters were hiding there. It was supposed to be a calm patrol. No gunfire, no chase, no danger, just a normal day. The kind of mission soldiers appreciated because it meant everyone would go home safely. Lena walked beside her team, checking her supplies again and again, like she always did. She had a habit of touching her medical bag every few minutes, just to be sure everything was there. She was known for her calmness, and even in the middle of chaos, she never raised her voice. But behind that calm face was someone who carried the fear of losing another friend. She had already seen too many soldiers die while she was trying to save them. She still remembered the ones she couldn't help, the ones whose names were written on metal dog tags that now rested in a box somewhere far away. Every time she closed her eyes at night, she saw them again. Maybe that was why saving others meant so much to her. It wasn't just a duty. It was her way of fighting back against death. Her team trusted her more than most medics. They said if anyone could keep them alive, it was Lena. She wasn't loud, she wasn't the strongest, and she never talked about bravery, but she was always the first to reach a wounded soldier, even if bullets were flying. Some called her Ice Heart, not because she was cold, but because she never panicked. As they walked deeper into the village, she noticed small signs that something was off. Windows were closed. No children were playing in the dirt streets. No old men sat outside drinking tea. Villages were never this quiet, not even during war. Silence was not peace here. It was a warning. Lena kept scanning the area. She didn't carry a rifle like the others, just a sidearm that she barely ever used. But she was trained to read danger in the ground, in the air, in people's faces. Something wasn't right. The radio in her ear crackled. The squad leader spoke softly. "Stay sharp. Something's wrong." Lena's hand tightened on her bag. She felt the familiar pull of fear, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford fear, not when others depended on her being steady. She thought of her parents back home, who still believed she worked in a safe medical post. They had no idea she spent her days on battlefields. She didn't tell them the truth. Not because she wanted to lie, but because she knew it would break them. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of them living with the news. As the team walked past a broken wall, a young soldier beside her whispered, "Feels like a ghost town, huh?" Lena nodded but didn't speak. She didn't want to say what she was thinking. Ghost towns usually have a reason. Her boots crunched softly on the ground. Dust rose with each step, floating in the sunlight like tiny sparks. For a moment, everything looked almost peaceful. But war had taught her something important. Peace in a war zone is never real. It is just the moment before something happens. She glanced at her watch. 9:14 a.m. A normal minute. The last normal minute she would ever have. Because in less than 60 seconds, everything would change. Her mission, her role, her body, her life. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking toward the moment that would define her forever. And the same soldiers she was ready to save, soon, they would be the ones lying on the ground, waiting for her hands to pull them back from death. She walked on, wounded only in places no one could see. But very soon she would be wounded for real. And even then, she would not stop. The explosion did not come with a warning. There was no sound before it, no shout, no signal. Just a sudden, violent blast that tore through the air and threw everyone off their feet. One moment Lena was walking, the next she was flying backward, her ears ringing so loudly that she couldn't even hear herself scream. The world turned white for a second, then black, then slowly returned like a broken film trying to play again. Dust filled the air. The ground shook. Pieces of metal and stone rained down like deadly hail. Lena tasted blood in her mouth and felt something wet on her leg. She didn't know yet if it was hers or someone else's. She blinked hard, trying to understand what had just happened. She had been through explosions before, but this one was different. It wasn't just a scare. It was a direct hit. An IED. A hidden bomb buried under the road. She tried to sit up, but her body refused at first. Her head spun, her vision blurred, and every sound felt far away, as if she was underwater. Her mind wanted to panic, but her training took over. She forced herself to breathe slowly. In focus. The first thing she saw clearly was a boot. A soldier's boot. But the man wearing it wasn't standing. He was lying twisted on the ground, motionless. That was all it took. Lena forgot her own pain and crawled toward him. Her hands shook, but not from fear, just from the shock of the blast. When she reached the soldier, she checked for breathing, pulse, bleeding. He was alive but badly hurt. Her leg throbbed, and when she looked down, she saw blood running into her boot. A deep cut, maybe shrapnel. But she didn't have time to care. She tore open her medical bag, grabbed a bandage and started working. Around her, the world was chaos. Soldiers were shouting. Someone was calling for help. Someone else was screaming in pain. The dust was still falling like a gray cloud. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air. Lena didn't stop. She moved to the next soldier, then the next. Some were bleeding. Some were unconscious. Some were crying out for their mothers. She didn't look at their faces as men or boys. She looked at them as patients. Lives. People she needed to save. Her leg hurt more with every step she took, but she walked anyway. Limping but moving. She grabbed tourniquets, injected morphine, pressed her hands against open wounds to stop blood from pouring out. She kept talking to the injured, even if they couldn't hear her. Stay awake. I've got you. You're not dying today. The blast had hit everyone differently. Some only had scratches. Others had lost limbs. Some were already gone. But Lena didn't have the luxury to cry or scream or break down. She had minutes to save lives before it was too late. The radio crackled again, voices trying to get control of the situation. But there was no clear command. The leader was down. The truck was destroyed. Communication lines were half broken. They were stuck in the middle of a silent village that now felt like a trap. Lena looked around and saw more soldiers trying to take cover, trying to understand what had happened. But she kept moving through the wounded, even though every step felt like stepping on glass. She walked past bodies, past blood, past her own fear. She had always known that one day she might die on the battlefield. But she never let that thought stop her from doing her job. Today was not about dying. It was about not letting the others die. Her hands were red now, not from paint, not from training drills, real blood, warm and wet. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve, leaving a streak across her face. Her heart was racing, but she didn't slow down. Someone grabbed her arm, a young private with tears in his eyes. "Doc, am I okay?" he whispered. "You're okay," she said, even though she wasn't sure. Sometimes hope was medicine too. She patched him up and kept walking. Her leg felt weaker now, but she ignored it. Pain meant she was still alive, and if she was alive, she could still work. Behind her, smoke rose into the sky. Pieces of the road were still burning. The silence of the village was gone, replaced by the sound of suffering, fear, and confusion. But this was only the beginning. In a few minutes, the real danger would arrive. The explosion wasn't the attack. It was the signal. And Lena, still bleeding, still standing, had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The dust had not even fully settled when Lena realized how many soldiers were hurt. Everywhere she turned, someone was bleeding, crying, or struggling to breathe. The ground that had been quiet minutes ago was now covered with bodies. Some moving, some not. Lena didn't have time to feel shock. She only had time to act. Her ears were still ringing from the explosion, but she forced herself to focus. The world sounded muted. like everything was happening behind a wall of water. She couldn't hear all the voices clearly, but she could see their lips moving, their hands reaching out, their eyes begging her to save them. She took a deep breath and started moving again. The first soldier she reached was young, too young. He was pressing his own hand against a deep cut on his stomach. Blood was coming out fast, the kind that doesn't wait. She knelt beside him and tore open a pack from her medical kit. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind was faster, already planning the next steps. "Stay with me," she said, her voice steady. "You're going to be okay." He nodded weakly, trusting her completely. Not because she promised, but because she had always been the one who showed up when things went wrong. She pressed gauze into the wound, wrapped bandage around him, and injected pain relief. She knew he needed surgery, but she only had minutes, maybe seconds, to keep him alive. She did what she could, then moved on. A few feet away, another soldier was lying on his side, gasping for air. His chest had shrapnel stuck in it. He was coughing up blood. Lena could feel panic rising in her throat, but she swallowed it. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She cut open his vest, found the source of bleeding, and blocked it with pressure. She tilted his head so he could breathe better. "You're not dying here," she whispered, almost like a promise to herself as much as him. Her own leg was getting worse. The cut had opened more with every step, but she pushed the pain down. She could feel blood soaking through her pants, filling her boot, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. That's what being a medic meant. You ignore yourself until everyone else is safe. She moved to the next man, no pulse. The next, missing a leg, screaming in shock. She tied a tourniquet so tight his skin turned pale. He grabbed her arm and cried out, "Don't leave me." "I'm not leaving," she said, even though she already had to move to the next. Her job was not saving just one life. It was saving as many as she could before time ran out. She kept moving, kept working, kept talking. Her voice was the only calm sound in the middle of chaos. Even the soldiers who could still fight looked at her with respect, because she was still walking when many of them couldn't even stand. Eventually she reached the radio operator. He was alive, but barely conscious, holding the radio to his chest like it was the last thing keeping him connected to the world. Blood pooled under him. Lena pressed her hand on his wound, and his eyes opened slowly. Did the call go through?" he asked, voice shaking. "I don't know," she answered honestly. The radio was cracked, half broken. If reinforcements didn't hear the call, they were alone. Completely alone. She looked around and saw something she didn't want to admit. There were more wounded than she could save. If help didn't arrive soon, she would start losing them, one by one. She pushed herself harder. She stopped thinking about time. She worked like she had an endless supply of strength, even though every second her body was getting weaker. She tied another bandage, another tourniquet, gave another injection, pressed her hands into another open wound. More blood on her clothes, more blood on her hands. She walked past the wounded again and again, trying to make sure none of them slipped away. They were her people, her brothers in uniform. If they fell, she would not forgive herself. Somewhere deep inside, a thought tried to whisper to her, "You're losing too much blood," but she shut it out. She would not let her body decide when she should stop. She would stop when they were safe, or when she collapsed, whichever came first. She glanced at the village road again. No civilians, no movement, no sound, except the cries of the wounded and the distant echo of something she couldn't yet identify. She didn't know it at the time, but the silence wasn't over. It was waiting. Something worse than the explosion was coming. Lena had saved many lives already, but she had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would shift again. Not into healing, but into war. And the medic who came to save lives would soon be forced to fight for them. The air was still thick with dust when the first shots rang out. Lena barely had time to register the sound before it became clear. The village wasn't just empty. It was crawling with enemy fighters. They had been hiding in the buildings, behind walls, in dark corners, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment had come, and now chaos erupted all around her. Bullets tore through the air with a deafening whine. Soldiers screamed, ducked, and dived for cover. The smoke from the explosion mixed with the dust from the ground, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Lena's heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady. Her mind raced, calculating who needed help first and who might not make it if she delayed even a second. One of her fellow medics was shot in the shoulder. He cried out, dropping his medical bag. Lena sprinted across the open dirt street, ignoring the pain in her own leg, ignoring the bullets that whizzed dangerously close. She reached him and slammed her hand over the wound. Blood was pouring fast, threatening to soak everything. She grabbed a tourniquet and tied it as tightly as she could, keeping him alive for the moment. All around her, the village had turned into a battlefield. Her squad tried to return fire, but they were outnumbered. There were too many attackers, and they were coming from every direction. Lena's eyes scanned the chaos. Buildings were on fire. Smoke filled the sky. Soldiers were falling one by one, some crawling towards safety, others lying completely still. Lena moved from one wounded soldier to the next, patching them up as best she could. She had to make split-second decisions. Who to save first, who could hold on a little longer, who might not survive at all. Her own leg was hurting more with every step, a deep cut still bleeding freely. But pain had no place here. The people around her needed her more than she needed herself. The enemy was smart. They kept changing positions, firing from unexpected angles, and cutting off escape routes. Lena realized quickly that staying in one place too long was dangerous. She had to keep moving, both to protect herself and to keep reaching her soldiers. Her training kicked in fully now, every instinct sharpened by years of preparation for moments like this. She heard someone scream behind her. A young private had been hit in the chest, and he was struggling to breathe. Lena dropped to her knees beside him, pressed her hands firmly against the wound, and shouted for help. No one could hear her over the chaos, but she didn't care. She held the soldier tight, refusing to let him slip away while she worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Another explosion rocked the nearby building. Dust and debris flew into Lena's face. She wiped her eyes, caught her breath, and kept moving. Around her, soldiers were yelling for cover, for reinforcements, for medics, for anyone who could help. Lena was all they had. The squad leader had been shot, and the radio operator was down, leaving the unit without command. In that moment, Lena realized that no one else could take charge. If she didn't act, the whole squad could be wiped out. Her legs ached, her hands were sticky with blood, and every part of her body screamed for rest. But there was no time. She dragged a wounded man behind a low wall for cover and administered pain relief and bandages while keeping one eye on the advancing enemy. She could feel her heart racing, could hear the thump of her own pulse in her ears, but she couldn't stop. The soldiers around her were struggling to keep their positions, but the enemy kept advancing. Lena noticed several men freezing in fear, some too shocked to move. She yelled at them to keep going, to stay low, to survive. Her voice cut through the chaos, firm and commanding. A voice of authority no one expected from a medic. She was saving their lives, yes, but she was also keeping them alive long enough to fight back. Then she saw it. A group of enemy fighters advancing toward a cluster of wounded soldiers, too weak to fight. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fallen rifle and fired a few shots, forcing them to duck. It wasn't her duty to shoot, but instinct took over. She had to protect her soldiers any way she could. Minutes felt like hours. Time had no meaning as Lena ran from soldier to soldier, treating wounds, firing when necessary, and dodging bullets. Her own blood mingled with that of others. Dust and smoke coated her skin. The village was no longer familiar. It was a maze of danger, screams, and fire. Somehow she kept moving, kept thinking, kept acting. Her squad had been reduced, some already hit, some pinned down, and some running for safety. The medic who had always saved lives was now the anchor holding the rest together. She knew that if she faltered, if she paused even for a second, more would die. And in that instant, she realized that this battle was not just about saving lives. It was about survival, about protecting her brothers in arms when no one else could. The enemy was strong, But so was she, stronger than she had ever been forced to be. She gritted her teeth, ignored the burning pain in her leg, and prepared to face whatever came next. The firefight was far from over, and the worst part of the mission was still ahead. Lena was no longer just a medic. She had become the shield, the lifeline, the last line between her soldiers and total disaster. The sound of gunfire had been constant for what felt like hours, but Lena had no time to notice how tired she was. Every step she took hurt. Her leg was bleeding badly, her arms were sore from patching up soldier after soldier. But she couldn't stop. Around her, her squad was falling apart. Men she had known for years were either hit, retreating, or frozen with fear. The squad leader was down, the radio operator was unconscious, and the unit had no one left to give orders. She looked around and realized the horrifying truth. She was now in charge, whether she wanted it or not. She was the only one moving confidently, the only one still thinking clearly. For years, she had trained to save lives, not to take them, and now the battlefield demanded something she had never imagined she would have to do. She glanced at the rifle lying beside a fallen soldier, the weapon she had never used in anger. Her stomach tightened. She had always avoided combat, always stayed behind the line to heal, not kill. But there was no choice now. If she didn't act, everyone around her could die. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the rifle. She examined it quickly, checking the magazine, the safety, the sights. Memories of her limited combat training flashed in her mind. She had learned how to shoot, how to aim, how to protect herself and others, but she had never faced real enemies this close. Now there was no practice, no drill. There was only life or death. Lena took a deep breath and raised the rifle. The enemy had advanced too close to the cluster of wounded soldiers she had been protecting. She had to act. She squeezed the trigger, firing at a group that had been closing in from a side street. Her first shots went wide, but the sound was enough to make them pause. She adjusted, took aim again, and managed a clean hit. A mix of fear and adrenaline surged through her. She wasn't used to this, the responsibility of holding back a real threat while being wounded herself. She moved quickly, crouching behind low walls, firing bursts to force the enemy back while keeping one eye on the soldiers she was still trying to save. She realized, in a strange, shocking way, that her training as a medic and her instincts as a soldier were now blending. She was saving lives in a different way, by fighting. Every few seconds she had to make choices. One group of attackers was flanking the wounded. Another was approaching from behind a corner. Lena ran between cover points, firing, shouting, and giving silent orders to the surviving soldiers. Her body screamed for rest, her vision blurred with blood and dust, but she ignored it. She had no time for weakness. She saw a young private, the same one she had treated after the explosion, struggling to drag another wounded soldier to safety. Lena ran to them, shouting instructions. "Cover me," she yelled. She fired over their heads, holding the enemy at bay long enough for the soldiers to move behind cover. The private looked at her with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and awe. Lena didn't have time to acknowledge it. She had to keep moving, keep fighting. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Time had lost all meaning. Lena's leg throbbed, her hands were slick with blood, and her lungs burned from exertion. Every fiber of her being wanted to collapse, to cry, to scream, but she refused. She had become the line between life and death, not just for herself, but for everyone still alive around her. She noticed another enemy fighter creeping toward a group of soldiers who were pinned behind rubble. Lena sprinted, firing as she went. Her aim wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to keep the enemy from advancing long enough. She threw herself down behind a wall, her side pressed against the rough stone, and continued firing in short bursts. Each shot was a desperate attempt to buy time, to protect the lives she had been trying to save since the explosion. Her mind flickered briefly to what she had been trained to believe, that medics didn't fight, that her job was to heal, to save, never to harm. And yet here she was, rifle in hand, saving lives by standing in the line of fire. She realized that sometimes survival demanded bending the rules. Sometimes doing the right thing meant doing what you had never thought you could. A few soldiers tried to rally, firing alongside her. Lena shouted encouragement, giving them orders they had no one else to take. She was no longer just a medic. She was their shield, their voice, their only chance at holding the line. Her hands were shaking now from exhaustion, but she gritted her teeth and kept shooting, moving from position to position, covering the injured as best she could. The chaos around her didn't slow. Smoke, dust, fire, screams, and gunfire filled every sense. She couldn't think of the pain in her leg, the blood on her hands, or the fatigue weighing down her body. All that mattered was keeping the soldiers alive 1 second longer at a time. And then she realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a firefight anymore. It was a battle she might not survive. Yet even with that thought in her mind, she didn't hesitate. She kept firing, kept protecting, kept moving. She had crossed the line from medic to fighter, and there was no turning back. Every shot she fired, every command she shouted, every step she took became a thread holding the remaining soldiers together. She had never imagined herself in this role, but now she was the only one capable of filling it. And in that moment, Lena understood something essential about courage. It wasn't about being unafraid. It was about moving forward, even when every part of you wanted to stop. She looked around at the chaos, at the men she had been saving, at the enemy forces closing in, and silently promised herself one thing. She would not let them down. No matter the cost, she would fight. Not because she wanted to, but because there was no one else who could. The battlefield had turned into a nightmare. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning buildings and gunpowder. Lena's leg throbbed with each step, blood soaking her pants and boots, but she refused to stop. Around her, the battlefield was littered with wounded soldiers, fallen comrades, and chaos she had never seen before. Every face she passed carried fear, pain, and desperation. And yet, no one moved as quickly, as decisively, or as determined as she did. Her squad was gone, either wounded, retreating, or pinned down. The squad leader was dead. The radio operator was unconscious. The men she had been trying to save were clinging to life behind cover, and now Lena realized something horrifying. She was the only one still standing, the only one still moving forward, the only one still fighting. Her heart pounded, but there was no time to think about fear. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to take cover, to give up. But she couldn't. If she fell now, the soldiers she had saved, or those she hadn't yet reached, would have no one to protect them. She was the line between life and death, and she had to hold it no matter what. Lena moved from cover to cover, her rifle heavy in her hands. Bullets whizzed past her constantly, some striking the walls, some kicking up dirt inches from her face. She fired carefully, aiming to keep the enemy at bay, to stop them from advancing on the injured soldiers she had been tending. Every shot was a small victory, every pause a dangerous risk. She glanced around. There were only a handful of soldiers still able to fight, hiding behind rubble or walls. She shouted instructions, giving orders to men who were too stunned or weak to make decisions on their own. Her voice cut through the chaos, firm and commanding. She was no longer just a medic. She was a leader, a protector, a force holding everything together. Her legs screamed in pain with every movement. She knew she had lost a lot of blood, and exhaustion was creeping into her muscles. Her hands shook, not just from adrenaline but from sheer fatigue. Still, she didn't slow down. She kept moving, patching wounds when she could, firing when she had to, and shouting orders to anyone who could hear. The enemy was relentless. They pressed forward in waves, trying to surround the few soldiers still alive. Lena fired shot after shot, forcing them to retreat momentarily, but she knew it wouldn't last. Her ammunition was running low, and her energy was almost gone. The thought of collapse flickered briefly in her mind, but she ignored it. She had to hold the line until reinforcements arrived. She moved to a small group of soldiers hiding behind a low wall. They were panicked, confused, and scared. Lena placed a steadying hand on one young private's shoulder. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You stay low. You keep quiet. Don't move unless I tell you." "We're still alive, but only if you do exactly what I say." The private nodded, eyes wide, gripping his rifle with shaking hands. Lena glanced at him and felt a pang of sorrow. He was so young, so scared, and yet she was asking him to trust her completely. That trust gave her strength, even as her body betrayed her. A sudden shout erupted from a nearby building. More enemy fighters were trying to flank the remaining soldiers. Lena's chest tightened, but she didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the open space, firing in controlled bursts, forcing them to retreat. She felt the sting of dirt and debris hitting her face, the sharp pain of a bullet grazing her shoulder. She ignored it. Every second she delayed could cost someone their life. She fired again, moving back toward the wounded behind cover. One by one, she made sure they were safe, checking their pulses, making sure they could breathe, tying off fresh bleeding. She didn't have the luxury to cry or panic. Her mind was entirely focused on the mission. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Lena's vision blurred, the world turning in and out of focus. Her muscles ached. Her body was on the verge of collapse. She was covered in her own blood and the blood of her comrades. And yet she kept going. She could feel the enemy pressing, but she wouldn't let them break through. She wouldn't let her soldiers die if she could prevent it. She realized she was the last line of defense. Every decision, every movement, every shot she fired mattered more than ever. There was no one else to hold the line. If she fell, the remaining soldiers would fall with her. That thought alone steeled her resolve. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, refusing to let her exhaustion or pain dictate her actions. Her breathing was ragged, but she kept shouting instructions, giving orders, and firing at the advancing enemies. The smoke and dust made it hard to see, but she relied on instinct, on memory, on sheer determination. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting with purpose, with urgency, with the singular focus of keeping her soldiers alive. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but Lena didn't think about it. She didn't think about fear or pain or death. She only thought about the men behind her, the lives she was protecting, and the promise she had made to survive long enough to save them. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos, bleeding and exhausted, Lena realized that she had become something she never imagined. The last one standing. The only one still fighting. And she would not let them down. Not now, not ever. The battle had raged on for what felt like forever. And Lena's body was screaming at her to stop. Her legs were heavy and trembling. Her arms stiff from carrying her rifle. Her hands sticky with blood. Her own and that of others. Every step was agony. Every breath a fight. And yet she kept moving, kept firing, kept shouting orders. She was exhausted, but she couldn't stop. She was the only one left holding the line, and if she fell, the few soldiers she had been protecting would have no chance. The enemy was relentless, but Lena's determination was fiercer. She had held them at bay for what seemed like an eternity, using every skill she had ever learned. Every shot, every movement, every command had been critical. And then, a sound came that made her heart leap. The faint hum of approaching vehicles, the unmistakable sound of reinforcements. Relief surged through her, but there was no time to relax. The enemy had not yet retreated, and Lena still had soldiers to protect. The first armored vehicle rolled into view, dust kicking up behind it. Soldiers jumped out, weapons ready, shouting orders that cut through the chaos. Lena recognized them immediately. They were backup, fresh soldiers who could finally take the fight to the enemy. For the first time in what felt like hours, she allowed herself a small, quiet hope. She had held the line long enough. Now help had arrived, but she didn't stop. She continued to fire and guide the remaining soldiers to safer positions. She moved beside them, covering their retreat and keeping the enemy at bay until the reinforcements could engage fully. Her muscles were burning, her vision blurred from sweat, blood, and dust, but she didn't care. Every second she delayed, every shot she fired, was one more life saved. She glanced behind her at the soldiers she had been protecting. Some were injured, some were shaken, but they were alive. They had made it through because of her. She could barely process it, The adrenaline still coursing through her veins was masking the true toll her body had taken. Her own injuries throbbed violently, and she felt dizzy from blood loss. But she forced herself to keep moving, to stay upright, to stay fighting until the enemy fully retreated. The reinforcements quickly took control of the battlefield, pushing the enemy back into the surrounding buildings and alleyways. The sound of gunfire began to fade as the attackers withdrew, finally realizing they were outmatched. Lena lowered her rifle slightly but didn't put it down. She needed to make sure that every soldier behind her was safe, that no one was left vulnerable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last group of wounded soldiers was secured behind the safety of the armored vehicles. Lena allowed herself to collapse to her knees. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She could barely lift her head, but the relief she felt was immense. She had survived. She had held the line, and the soldiers she had been protecting were alive. Her vision was blurry, but she could see the faces of the men she had saved. They were looking at her with awe, fear, gratitude, and disbelief. Some tried to stand and thank her, but Lena could barely manage a weak nod. Words would not have been enough. She had done what she had done not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was her duty. She had been their shield, and that was all that mattered. Medical personnel rushed forward to tend to her and the others. They cleaned her wounds, gave her fluids, and helped her lie down on a stretcher. Lena allowed herself a brief moment to feel the pain fully, to acknowledge the exhaustion she had pushed aside for so long. Her leg was heavily bandaged, her hands stiff, and her body bruised and bleeding. Every part of her ached. But despite the pain, a quiet satisfaction filled her. She had done the impossible. She had survived and saved others against overwhelming odds. As the medics moved her to a safer location, Lena's thoughts turned to the men she had lost. Some had fallen in the chaos, and she felt a pang of guilt for not being able to save them all. But she also knew that she had done everything she could. Every decision she had made, every shot fired, every order given had been for them. She had fought with every ounce of strength left in her body to protect those who depended on her. Later, as she lay in the field hospital, her mind replayed the events over and over. The explosions, the screams, the chaos, the fear, and the determination. It all seemed almost unreal. She thought about the young private she had guided to safety, the soldiers she had patched up despite her own injuries, and the moments when she had fired her rifle to hold the enemy back. She had crossed a line she never imagined she would have to cross, becoming both medic and fighter in the same battle. And as the adrenaline faded and her body finally allowed her to rest, Lena realized something profound. Courage wasn't about not feeling fear or pain. It was about moving forward despite them, about standing when everyone else had fallen, and about giving everything you have to protect others. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had saved lives. Even as she drifted into exhaustion, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what came next, no matter how impossible the challenge, she would never stop fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. She had learned that she was stronger than she ever believed, and that strength could save lives. The chaos of the battlefield was finally over. The smoke hung in the air like a thick curtain, but the enemy had retreated, leaving silence in their wake. Lena lay on a stretcher, her body battered, bruised, and bleeding, but alive. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could finally breathe. Her heart was still pounding, her lungs still burning, but the immediate danger was gone. She could finally allow herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Her eyes scanned the field hospital. Soldiers she had saved were receiving treatment, their injuries being tended to by other medics. Some were groaning, some were crying, some were in shock. Lena's gaze lingered on them, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and sorrow. Many had survived because of her. Some hadn't. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself remember the faces of those she couldn't save, knowing that the memories would haunt her, but also drive her to continue fighting for those who could still live. The medics moved around her quickly, cleaning her wounds, applying dressings, and giving her fluids. Her own injuries were severe. A deep cut on her leg, abrasions on her arms, bruises across her body, but she barely noticed. Her mind was replaying the battle in fragments. The explosion, the chaos, the gunfire, the screams, and the moments when she had stood alone, holding the line against overwhelming odds. Each memory felt surreal like a movie, yet she knew it had all been painfully real. Her squad members, those who had survived, came to her side one by one. Some tried to speak, but words failed them. Their eyes, wide with awe and disbelief, said everything. They had witnessed her courage firsthand, the way she had moved through danger, patched the wounded, and even picked up a rifle to fight when there was no one else to do so. Lena gave them a small nod, refusing to speak much. She didn't need their praise. She had done what she had done because it had to be done, not for recognition. A young private, the one she had guided through the firefight, gently touched her arm. "Sergeant, you saved us. All of us," he whispered, his voice trembling. Lena tried to smile, but it was weak, almost pained. "I just did my job," she said quietly. But inside, she knew it had been more than that. She had gone beyond duty. She had fought not just to save lives, but to protect hope, courage, and the bond between soldiers that no one else could replace. As she rested, she thought about the moments that had defined the battle. The explosion that had thrown her to the ground, the injured soldiers who had cried out for help, the enemy fighters advancing relentlessly, and the moment she had picked up a rifle for the first time in real combat. She remembered the fear, yes, but more than that, she remembered the clarity, the focus, and the unwavering determination that had carried her through. Fear had been there, but it had not stopped her. Pain had been there, but it had not slowed her. Even in the hospital bed, surrounded by medical personnel and wounded soldiers, Lena felt the adrenaline linger. Her mind refused to settle completely. She thought about how quickly everything had changed, how the line between medic and fighter had blurred, and how she had survived against impossible odds. She had crossed a threshold she never imagined she would, and it had shown her what she was truly capable of. As she lay there, the young soldiers she had saved clustered around her, asking questions, recounting moments from the battle, and expressing their gratitude in ways words could barely capture. Lena listened quietly, letting them speak, letting them process the horror they had survived. She understood that their thanks were not just for the battle. It was for the courage, the leadership, and the determination she had shown when all seemed lost. The field hospital was busy, but Lena felt a quiet sense of completion. The mission had been chaotic, terrifying, and brutal, but the outcome had been survival. She had saved lives, led her squad in a way no one else could, and proved to herself that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. She realized that being a hero was not about glory or recognition. It was about being present when it mattered most, even when the odds were stacked impossibly high. Hours later, as the adrenaline finally began to fade, Lena drifted into a fitful rest. Her body was exhausted, every muscle aching, but her mind replayed the events over and over. She thought about those she had saved, those she had lost, and the moments when she had stood alone against overwhelming danger. She realized that she would never forget any of it, and she didn't want to. The experience had changed her, strengthened her, and shaped the soldier and person she would continue to be. Lena's story would later spread through the ranks, whispered among soldiers as an example of bravery, selflessness, and determination. She became more than a medic that day. She became a symbol of courage under fire, of strength in the face of fear, and of the extraordinary things one person could do when they refused to give up. And though she never sought recognition, she carried the quiet knowledge that she had done everything possible to protect her brothers in arms, standing alone when no one else could, and surviving to ensure that others lived. In that field hospital, with her wounds being treated and her heart still racing from the day's events, Lena understood something essential. Courage is not about never being afraid. Courage is about standing up, moving forward, and fighting for what matters, even when every part of you wants to fall. She had survived. She had saved lives. And she had proven to herself that she could face the impossible and come through on the other side.